I've been very privileged in my preaching career to have made some great acquaintances, to get to know people. People would kind of be surprised, I guess, as ornery as I am, to find out that I'm a people person. But I love visiting people. I love the relationships we have and get to know people. It's rather sobering, though, when you talk about where we're going after this life. And what's really interesting is I have visited folks, and here recently, and I know that Marion won't mind my using her kind of as an example, 93 years old. She's been on this planet quite some while. And she has a perspective. Most of you who know her and have visited her know she has a perspective. And it's not that she's terribly bashful about letting you know what that perspective is. But I've always enjoyed visiting with older people who have, I say older than me, older people that have lived life in a time frame and in an era that I'm not quite familiar with. Either I was young and grew up in that era, but wasn't really perceptive about what was going on around me. And I would very much invite you younger people. And I know sometimes it seems tedious because talking to us old folks, I'll include myself in that one, can be kind of slow going sometimes because we do reminisce and talk about the good old days. But let me suggest to you that if you will listen to some of these older folks, you'll get a perspective you did not see before. You'll see things like someone that is aged has seen them, but you won't see what they see. And what gets really interesting is when they say something like, I'm not going to be here for much longer. You know, that reality meets mortality kind of thing. And it makes you begin to wonder when you're a bit younger and you're not looking, I mean, I know I'm a bit older, but I don't plan on dying tomorrow. Now, somebody may solve that problem for me after this sermon. I don't know. But I don't plan on dying tomorrow. I don't know how many of us might plan to die tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? But when someone is struggling, and they've been struggling for a long while, I can understand the perception, or the perspective, of looking at your life and realizing I'm not going to be here very much longer. That kind of thing occurred to me some years ago when I was, I turned, I think, 45 or so, and I began to realize, there's more years behind me than there are in front of me. That was my first kind of wake up to, our life here is temporary, and we talk about that all the time. We use James and his illustration of the vapor above the teapot. We're all very familiar with that. But the reality of it is we don't really give it a lot of consideration. We don't think about it. And I understand why. Who wants to think about dying? Well, I would like to tell you this morning, as a perspective, that's what we ought to do as Christians a little more often. We ought to think about dying. We ought to think about being gone from this existence. As a matter of fact, I would highly encourage us, especially the younger we are, to be more concerned about it. There was a young man here in this community who had a head-on collision. As folks around town have been talking about it quite a while now. Thankfully, he's up and he's moving. He's got his cognizance about him, but he had a head-on collision, and it was thought for a while there he wouldn't come out of that induced coma. He'd be dead. And he was a young man throwing a javelin, everything in front of him in his life, and all of a sudden, reality hits, and he's not impermeable. He's not, forever. And I would suggest that we need to think about that. It's ironic to me when I read this account here in John 14 that this is the beginning of where Jesus, we talked about it last week in John 13, where he knew his hour had come, okay? He's about to die. And I'm telling you what, the most horrible, tragic, terrible thing that could happen to a person. That's what Jesus knew was coming for him. And his apostles had vaguely a clue, but not really any idea of how horrendous this would be. But one of the things Christ shored up for his people is to let them know this is not the end, okay? I've got something prepared for you. Now, this is kind of unique in the landscape of religion, particularly some of the theories that people have about religion. I did a bunch of research, and I upgraded it somewhat from some of the stuff I've been doing over the years about some of the theories about what happens when you die. And there's some interesting theories goes on. In fact is, I would submit that anytime you leave God's Word, they get weird and unnatural, what people think about. But when you talk about the afterlife, what is going to be after this life, well, here's a statement about Buddhism. I don't know how familiar you are with Buddhism and the recycle mentality that it's got. The unifying feature of each is that the cycle of death and rebirth, reincarnation, is to be avoided by achieving nirvana. Nirvana means extinction or blowing out, also often translated as bliss. So the idea of the afterlife for Buddhism is to disappear from the face of existence. I can't imagine how that's just a great thing. As a matter of fact, I would submit that during the 60s, when we had introduced into a nation that at one time was homogenous to a degree, all believed in God, most believed in Jesus, that was kind of the paradigm of religion in America. All of a sudden we introduced into America in that time all kinds of different religions. It wasn't unusual or unnatural to see a Buddhist monk sitting on a street corner and light himself up and burn himself to death because, hey, what he's shooting for is existence. God, just totally get rid of existence. Wow, that's so different than what Christianity teaches. And yet that was very popular, and to this day is very popular, converted somewhat into the New Age theory, where you basically believe you're God, but nevertheless, there is no longer an individual, and there is no survival of subjective experience. And that is the answer to the suffering of this life. The essential nature of embodied life is suffering, and so what you do is you just get rid of that. What a great answer. Why would you want to live? In fact, I'll tell you right now, I've never understood atheists, and I mean them no offense, but I'm telling you, it's just not logical to me to think that you are nothing more than a glorified cockroach. I don't get that. What purpose, what meaning, what is existence if all you are is evolved stuff? Cannot you see logically that we as human beings have a nature, a scenario in our mind that gives us reason and cognition that is totally different than every other creature on the planet? And if it evolved, at what point did it and how? And they can't answer any of those, and so they just don't talk about it. Which is what a lot of folks do, when, especially in religion, when you don't know, you just don't talk about it. Well, we're going to talk about it this morning because there's all kinds of theories about heaven. I looked up some stuff on the Islamic belief, and again, and before someone gets upset because I am naming names, I know that's a struggle for some when you get in the pulpit and you name names, but folks, these people, I'm reading from their stuff, okay? If they're not embarrassed and unashamed about it, why in the world would we be to mention who they are and what they're saying? How is that a bad thing? They promote it all over the place. I'm just repeating what they promote. So please allow me to explain to you, the Islamic Orthodox commentators have taken the imagery literally and do believe that heaven is a place of sensual pleasure. In other words, it's a redux. It's a second verse. It's a chapter following the first chapter. We're just going to have another go at all of the stuff we got wrong, evidently, in this life. And that's what Muslim heaven is like. It says within it are gardens and springs, wearing garments of fine silk and brocade, facing each other. We will marry, evidently Christ's concept in Matthew 22 about the fact that in heaven there is no marriage nor given in marriage. This is a direct contradiction to that. So I'm sorry, folks, but you cannot be Islamic and be Christian and be on the same page. It's not possible. We're going to find that out in this very text here in a few minutes. So either they are right or we are right, one or the other, but both cannot be right. That we're going to a heaven where there's, and I've often wondered about that, you're going to heaven, you're going to marry, you've got thousands of virgins. How long do they remain virgin after you marry? I don't know. Fair women with large, beautiful eyes. Everything's wholly physical. It's just a repeat of what we had here. even under the rubric of Christianity, which I don't find Mormonism or the Church of Christ of Latter-day Saints to be under that rubric, but nevertheless, it's placed there by most religions today. Their concept of heaven or the afterlife is very different. Unique to the Mormon faith is the belief in 3 degrees of glory, or 3 distinct heavens. Celestial, home to the gods and future hope of Latter-day Saints. This is in their book, okay? They believe that you're going to become a god. You know, if they had read Genesis 3:5, where the very temptation that Satan put before Eve that got Adam and Eve kicked out of the garden was, you eat this tree and you'll become like God. And here we have it, right here in a major religion in America who preaches that when you die, your afterlife is to become a god, and you're going to have your own little earths, and you're going to propagate and put people on that earth, and it's just going to be a recycling of what we see now. In fact, it's interesting. Anytime you get away from the Bible, you start having these different kinds of ideas and definitions. In fact, you can even make up terms, because the second type of heaven is going to be terrestrial. That's the dwelling of the non-righteous Mormons or unfaithful Mormons. And then the third is telestial. That word's found nowhere in the English language except because the Mormons made it up. And that's the folks that's eternal destination of the wicked. But I want you to note in their theories of how things are, no man can conceive of the glory that may be attained through the resurrection. This is from the book, the Mormon Doctrines. God himself, the Father of us all, is a glorified, exalted, immortal, resurrected man. That's from their own books. In other words, what we're looking for is something that's very temporal, very physical, and very much like what we're existing in now. In spite of Paul's comment in 1 Corinthians 15 that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of heaven, we have to change. I think part of the reason Jesus was trying to, and he starts almost with this after chapter 13, speaking to his apostles here before he's going to be killed. In chapter 14, he begins with giving them hope. He begins with giving them something to look forward to. Frankly, just popping out of existence doesn't thrill me. I would like to live on, but I would like to not have this old stinking body that is such a headache for me. I would like to have no lust of the flesh or lust of the eyes or pride of life to have to deal with. That's what Jesus is promising, but there is so much more. And I think this is where people kind of drop this, because when we read this, and by the way, this is the most read text at funerals that there is. Psalm 23 runs a close second. But this text right here, nearly every funeral you will ever go to, this is what's read. And I fear people miss the point that Jesus was trying to get across, because they're looking at the afterlife as something like what we've got now. And it's nothing like we have now. As a matter of fact, there's a neat verse in 1 John 3 and 2 that says we really don't know very much about what's going to go on there. But what we know is that we will be like him. Now, how is he? Well, there's not a lot of hint in the Bible. In fact, I think that's a frustration for folks when people, as much as we love to talk about heaven, there's just not a lot said about it in the book. There's not a lot given away. And I suspect a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're just not smart. We don't have the capacity to understand things. Well, look at Revelation 21:21. How do you describe a place where there's no pain and no crying, and then you have streets of gold? I got tickled about the guy that wanted to get in the coffin with his gold bars, and somebody looked at him and said, why do you want to get in the coffin with gold bars? Why take street paving up there to heaven? Streets made of gold. It's not literal. It's a condition of mind. It's an existence. It's not even a place. That's another thing. I hear people talk about old country songs about, oh, Mama's up there. She's looking down from heaven, looking right at me, knowing what's going on. No, Mama's in Hades right now and has no clue. Luke 16:19 through 31 has no clue what's going on down here. Quit worrying about mama. You're alive. You can do something with your life. Do something with your life, because eternity is in the balance. And so Jesus is telling them, this is what it's going to be like. Here's your hope. In fact, you can sum up this text with hope. And then as a punchline, I'll tell you why most folk don't have hope. And that's a sad story. I realize that. It's not popular, but it's the truth. Notice in the text when he begins to speak to his apostles, let not your heart be troubled. Now, there is not an assumption there. Jesus understands from the circumstance. He's there with his apostles. He's telling them, I'm about to be crucified. I'm going to die. And that's worrying them. Because this is the guy they watch put legs on fellas and make the blind see and the deaf hear. He can do all kinds of things. They saw Lazarus rise from the dead, and he's telling us he's going to die and leave us? That had to be earth-shattering. But he wanted them to know, don't worry, I'm going to take care of you. And he wants us to know, whatever happens in this existence, don't worry, God will take care of you. He cares about you, according to 2 Peter 5. Therefore, do not let your heart be troubled. Here's the first criterion that makes it so hard for some folks in this world. You believe in God, believe also in me. Two things there are mentioned, by the way. You must believe in God. Hebrews 11:6, you cannot please him unless you believe in God, okay? That leaves our atheist friends and our agnostic friends outside the door. The plain fact of it is you cannot be expecting anything beyond this existence that has anything to do with things that are described as pleasure and wonder and tremendous fellowship and companionship. You can't expect that in heaven. No. It's not going to happen if you don't believe in God, and you have to believe in Jesus. John 8:24 made it clear that if you don't believe that I'm He, you'll die in your sins. You cannot become a recipient of this afterlife that's going to be so wonderful if you don't believe. If you're in this audience this morning and you don't believe, let me encourage you to talk to me. Visit with somebody here who's a Christian and let them show you in the Bible where Jesus says, I am who I said I was, and why He came. And He's beginning to explain this to His disciples. He's telling them, I'm here to die for your sins, to make it possible for you to go where I am. And so therefore, He goes on and tells them about, and I always like to use this with reference, okay, the place He's going. Because it's not a place. It's an interesting thing. We live in this universe and we're kind of confined, I guess, by the parameters of our existence. In the beginning, time, God created the heavens and the earth. There's matter. We are limited in how we perceive things. That's what makes heaven so hard to understand and explain. Because heaven's not a place. And I know some of our songs say that, but I think they're saying it figuratively. It's not a place, it's an existence. I mean, think about it. If we're going to be with God and with Jesus Christ, and they're God and they're everywhere, where is everywhere? That's kind of hard. It's kind of a conundrum, is it not? It's an existence. When we look at the afterlife, we need to change our perspective from things that we see and feel and hear, the sentient of now, and put it on a higher plane. And this was Jesus' problem with His apostles through His entire career, getting them to look at spiritual things. He'd feed 4,000 people and then say, oh, well, they're the leaven of the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and the apostles would go, oh, we didn't bring bread. You need to bring bread when He just fed 4,000. They weren't thinking spiritually. We need to think spiritually when we talk about that later existence after life. Jesus was prepping them for that. He said, in my Father's house there are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you, I am going to have to die because I can't take you to a place, quote unquote, where you need to be if I don't die. He told them earlier, should I ask God, please get me out of this? Don't let me suffer this, which He did, by the way, in His prayer. But He tells the apostles, that's why I came here. That was my role in coming here, is to die for people's sin so they could go to an existence that is with God, where there is no sin. And you and I can't get there on our own because we're sinners. The only way we can do it is through the blood of Christ. And so therefore, He says, I go to prepare a place for you. I want you to know at this writing, that place had not yet been prepared. Okay? So therefore, whatever he was going to prepare, it wasn't finished yet. It wasn't done. You'll notice in the next verse, though, he says, and here is 4 things that are chronological, basically. If I go to prepare a place, that's what I'm doing, going to prepare a place for you, I will come again. Jesus is going to come back. Now, there is always this concept of consequence and God's retribution, judgment, usually used in the negative way. God's coming back to judge the earth. You know, for a Christian, that shouldn't be an issue. If it is an issue, you need to rethink your Christianity. Folks, we ought to be looking forward to his coming. I can't wait to go to heaven. I sit there and watch Miss Marion with a broken pelvis struggling and in the pain she is in, and when they move her, it hurts. You can see the grimace in her face, trying so hard not to cry. I don't want that. People think I'm joking when I say I'd like to go out, ride a motorcycle, and hit a back truck in the grill. Okay, that's not terribly romantic, and it make me look not pretty. So it'll be a closed casket funeral. Okay, I understand that. But you know what? There's nothing in this life I love. I'm ready to go. Are you? That's the kind of existence I want to go to. That's what I want you to go to. But we have to think that way in order to be ready to go there. We don't know a lot, but I'll tell you what, we're going to be with him. And again, he says, I'm going to go, but I'm going to come again. I'm looking forward to Jesus coming again. Judgment doesn't scare me, not because I'm perfect. I am way not perfect. But what I am is forgiven. What I can count on is the blood of Christ. And I'm ready. And when God sees fit for Jesus to come again and this earth to end, I'll be ready now. Tomorrow, next week, whatever it is, I'm ready for Jesus to come again. Because when he comes again, he's going to receive me to himself. And this is where I think things ought to change in our perspective, and he was trying to convey this to the apostles. You know what they were worried about? They were not worried that they wouldn't be able to eat bread because Jesus could go, and there it is. That's not what they were worried about. They were not worried about getting on a rough sea and have Jesus say, peace be still, and everything was calm. You know what they were worried about? They were going to lose their relationship. Now you know why this is read at so many funerals. Because all of a sudden that camaraderie, that fellowship, that relationship we have can no longer, in a great deal from our perspective here on earth, it can't be anymore. Because that person is now gone. We can't go over and shake their hand. We can't go over and give them a hug. I know some of you have experienced it, and I don't know what I would do without Kelly. I mean, I'd starve. That's the first thing that would happen. Okay, that's a given. But I don't know how to function without my mate. And I look out through here and I see some of you who have lost your mate. My heart goes out to you. But wouldn't it be great to be able to see him again someday in an existence where all of the stuff that goes on in this life doesn't exist? Wouldn't it be great to be in a place where we're with Christ? You see, as he begins to teach them about this next existence, it's not about things. It's not about a physical place. It's not even about, well, what we have or what we are. What it's about is our relationships. Notice the next thing he says. I'm going to receive you to myself. Why? That where I am, you may be also. After this life, I want to be with Christ. I don't know the details of what it's going to be like. I've had kids in high school class, well, what are you going to do all day? There's no video games, you know. I don't know. I have to be honest. I have no clue. But you know what? I'll be with Christ. And that's why I love talking to older folks and developing that relationship with them. Because, like Mary, she realizes her time on this earth is not long. If you haven't visited some of the older folks in this church, I recommend you do. Take the time. There'll never be extra time to do it. You'll never find spare moments, okay? Take the time to appreciate some of our older Christians, because there will be a time, maybe, if Jesus doesn't come, that you will not be able to visit them and to hear their life and what they have to say and the perspective they have and develop more fully the relationship that is eternal. Because that's it, folks. That's the only thing that lasts forever. It's me loving you and you loving me. That's it. Everything else about this existence is gone. As one preacher once said, it's all going to burn up. Absolutely right. And Jesus was trying to tell them, I want to comfort your heart, because what you're really worried about is not the bread or the rough seas. It's doing without me. And I want you to know I'm coming back for you. Because our relationship, my friends, is eternal. It's not temporary. It's eternal. And where I go, you know, and the way you know. Now, that befuddled Thomas, granted, he didn't understand, and Jesus told him, well, here's what it's about. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I appreciate Brother Simmons' comment this morning in his class about missing the boat sometimes when we get excited about having learned the truth and become a Christian, and the excitement and the thrill of that. But look at how many people don't have that excitement, don't have that hope, don't have the relationships. Folks, we are more than just a bunch of folks sitting in a big old pile of bricks here, okay? We are the Lord's church, developing relationships that are going to last forever. Next time you get frustrated with your brother, think about that. Next time that you find the flaw, think about that. The apostles were not perfect. But Jesus understood, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. You'll do the best you can to do what you need to do, because the relationship we have with each other can go forever, because we can all be with Christ. If your life is not there, you need to get it there. If you know what to do, respond to the invitation. If you don't, ask somebody, what is the hope that lies within you? Because they will explain it in meekness and in fear. Understanding that it's about our knowing each other, our loving each other, and our looking forward to a place where all the stuff that gives us grief here will not be. It will be so wonderful to be with Christ. If you look forward to that hope, then if you don't, we offer an invitation for you. If you do, use it every day of your life to become stronger in your relationships with others who are going to be with Christ. Won't you stand? Just sing.